All right, y'all. So good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are located right now. Like she just mentioned, I am going to talk about how to attract contributors to your open source project. Feel free to like type in the chat or raise your hand. I'll try to check the chat or the Q&A or the raised hand. And sounds like she'll also like notify me if I didn't notice. But yeah, I love to interact with people, so feel free to interrupt me. So my first question to y'all is actually, I'm gonna prompt you all to type in the chat, who is your favorite celebrity? Or if you're someone who's like, I don't really like celebrities, who is somebody that you're like, okay, this celebrity is not that bad. I think they're okay. Beyonce, yes. Who doesn't love Beyonce? Anybody else? I'll wait like 2 minutes. I know sometimes people are shy or they may not be like fully paying attention, but yeah, just throw anybody in that you can think of. Yeah. Okay. Maybe nobody, maybe nobody will, but that's okay. I will keep moving. But if you start, okay, let's see who else. Zendaya, yeah, I love Zendaya. She's just so lovely. I don't know if people know Chloe and Halle. I love Chloe and Halle too. I will move forward since, yeah. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about Kanye West. Yes, her outfits, they were killer. If you've seen her at the Oscars, very good. I'm going to talk a little bit about Kanye West. He's not my favorite. I wouldn't say like this person is my favorite celebrity. But I did recently watch his documentary on Netflix, which made me remember how much I did like him in the past. I know a lot of people say they miss the old Kanye. That definitely is me. I was someone who just like didn't get a chance to listen to a lot of rap music as a kid. Like my parents always had me to listening to gospel. So that was like my chance to discover like rap music. And I was like, oh wow, this is so awesome. So he really influenced my musical taste as a preteen. I think I was like 11, 12 when I discovered him. And then to me, he did change the rap game, especially in watching that Netflix documentary. I realized, wow, he really helped to move the rap game from like gangster rap to more backpack rap, which is, I guess, like a little bit more conscious rap, a little bit more like nerdy, less talking about like committing violent crimes and stuff like that. And I'm assuming most people know about him, right? You may have heard about him for good or bad reasons, especially in recent times, like a lot of bad reasons. And if you don't know about him, I'll give you a quick little breakdown of him. He's known for his many breakdowns, right? So he does have a history of bipolar, which he's been public about or honest about. So it's a battle for him. And he often has like breakdowns in public or on social media. He also owns a fashion brand called Yeezy. And he's known for his rapping. That's what he's best known for. He has like 21 Grammys. And he has a lot of albums out, like College Dropout, The Life of Pablo, and Donda. So type in the chat. I just want to know, are you a fan of Kanye? Yes or no? I'm more like, maybe, but I'm just curious. You're in the middle. Yeah, me too. Maybe, meh. Yeah, like right now, like maybe for the past couple years, I haven't been, but there's a reason I'm going to talk about him. Okay, so we got mostly no's, mostly people being like, I understand. So from the documentary, yeah, I will connect it. From the documentary, it made me realize that like in the beginning, nobody really wanted to sign him as a rapper. I had no awareness of that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because he was known as a producer, and like back then, I guess it wasn't popular for a producer to be able to also rap. So people tried to keep him in a box and in a bubble. And in the documentary, you could see it's kind of was a really different side of him where he's like 19 years old trying to go into the Rockefeller offices and start rapping for people, and people were just like ignoring him. And I'm like, oh wow, that's so crazy. They're like ignoring this song that actually really blew up. And he just wanted them to give him a chance. Even after he produced half of Jay-Z's album called The Blueprint, like people just didn't want to give him a chance. They were just like, I don't really care. But he eventually did succeed in becoming a rapper. Obviously, he built a reputation through like promotion, having his community support him, making good projects, and persistence. So the connection here is about increasing the popularity of your open source project, right? You're listening to this talk probably because you're interested in open source. Maybe you're thinking about creating an open source project, or you have one and you want people to contribute to it and use it, but nobody is. You're just like the only contributor, and maybe your project is getting stale and you're like, okay, I forgot about it. So we do want to build community around that project. We want to build community as developers, but how do we do that? And I think, or at least my theory is, you can use some of Kanye's methods and how he got himself from being like someone that people didn't care about to having a reputation, sometimes not good. But we can get your project to being known by using these same methods of being promoting, community support, making good projects, and persistence. So before I dive into all that, I'm gonna tell you who I am. If you're like, who is this person? And I love to like put my introduction nearer to the middle, just because I just like to start with a good hook. So my name is Rizel Scarlett. I'm a developer advocate at GitHub. I'm a junior developer advocate at GitHub. I started here like 6 months ago. I was a software engineer in the past, and I was a software engineer for about 3 years. After graduating from a coding boot camp. I also did IT support for like 2 years before the coding boot camp. I'm currently the director of programming at an organization called G Code House. And G Code House helps to introduce women of color and non-binary people of color to code. So I'm very passionate, I hope you guys can see that, about educating and empowering people about tech. And I'm also addicted to social media, especially Twitter. I started using MySpace when I was like 11, and I think the age limit was much higher than that, like 15 or something, and I just lied. So in that vein, definitely feel free to follow me on Twitter, GitHub, Instagram, #nodev.2, Twitch, YouTube, and eventually I'll like start posting on TikTok, but my handle is Black Girl Bites on all of those platforms. I'm pretty active on there, and I will probably follow back. Let me see what's in the chat. Oh, someone said yay, cool. All right, so let's talk about promotion. If you want people to contribute, you have to tell people that your project exists. Like nobody knows your project exists just because you created a repo and added code to it. That's part of why it's so quiet, right? And let's look at Kanye. So from watching the documentary, I learned that he created his own buzz. Like I mentioned earlier, he went into the different offices of Rockefeller and started rapping, and everyone was like, okay, like ignoring him, closing the doors on him. But that's part of how he created his own buzz. That's part of how he was like, hey, I'm a rapper. I want people to know that. He also appeared on MTV's You Hear It First in 2002. So he reached out to MTV a bunch of times, and he was like, hey, I want to be on here. And they were like, sure. So that helped to increase his popularity, or the fact that he's known as a rapper. He showed his music to other rappers. Some didn't even care. Like he would show it to them and he'll be like, you want to do a feature? You want to help me with it? And they would like say, yeah. And then they would leave. But definitely still show, like he still showed that his music to other people. He auditioned to rap on at places like Def Jam, even though that was mostly like spoken word and poetry. That was another way of getting himself out there. And he put out his own mixtapes when he realized that Rockefeller was not really that interested in producing some of his music for him. So I think, to me, looking at that, I was like, oh wow, that's a super humbling experience. It's very different than the Kanye we see today, who's like super arrogant and intense. It's like he's trying to fight to get known, to be known, and he believes in himself. So my question is like, how would people have known that he could rap if he didn't tell them? Even though it was humbling, he had to do that. And I think sometimes it's kind of nerve-wracking to promote yourself or promote your project. I even know sometimes I get a little nervous to like retweet on Twitter, like, hey, I'm speaking at this event. But it's part of what you want to do if you want people to start getting attracted to your project. And here are my suggestions for that type of promotion. Speak at conferences or meetups, and deliver talks about what you're building, why you're building it, issues you faced building it, and discoveries you made. Even if the talk is about like a failure you had and you realized, oh man, Docker wasn't the one for your project, or maybe GitHub Actions just didn't solve the solution you wanted it to do. You can go ahead and talk about that at conferences. I also suggest blogging, right? That's a really great way to talk about where you're at and where you're going. Leverage dev.to, leverage Hashnode, make your own blog, and talk again about what you're building, why you're building it, the issues that you faced, and any discoveries that you made. Developers do love to read about discoveries, and they like to learn things from people, even if you feel like, oh man, maybe people have done this before, or maybe this is not eye-opening. It is going to be eye-opening to somebody, and they may be interested in the problem you're solving, and they might be like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and check out this repo and contribute to it. I also suggest talking about it on Twitter. So tweet in an authentic way, not like a pushy like marketing way, but just say like, hey, I've been building this. Here's what I learned. This has been so cool. Like I tweeted the other day about a VS Code extension I made, and people were super excited for me. Talk about your discoveries, talk about the new releases, talk about any bug fixes you had. And tweet out those blog posts, tweet out those speaking events that you're going to, and also talk on Twitter Spaces or podcast about that. Reach out to people. Oftentimes people are like, oh, how are you getting on podcasts and stuff like that? I reached out to a podcast host and I'm like, hey, can I be a guest speaker? And most of the time they say yes. If they say no, they're lost, you know? And another thing I want to talk about is Hacktoberfest. This is an event in October that encourages people to make their first contributions to projects. If you participate in Hacktoberfest as a maintainer and label some of your issues as Hacktoberfest approved, that's when new contributors are going to be excited and they're going to be looking for a project and they're going to be like, oh my goodness, I can contribute to this one. So this is when you can get a large number of contributors. I do see a question in the Q&A, so I'm going to go ahead and check it. Just noticed you were a resilient coder. That's so cool, and bravo. There are at least 15 folks from 100 devs at the conference today. Leon Noel is changing lives. Anyway, to the question, what were your first contributions projects? Oh, this is a great question. I did talk about this at All Things Open. So also one, yay, Leon Noel is teaching you. And as you know, I was in Resilient Coders, so he taught me too. And it was, let me press answer live so I can get this notification. Like Resilient Coders was intense, but completely worth it. Like, as you can see now, I can code pretty well, and now we work at GitHub. So I'm glad that you're learning from him. And the first project that I contributed to is a project called Open Sauce. I would definitely encourage you to look into it. Definitely a welcoming community. They have a whole bunch of easy, I should say relatively easy, because I don't know like what level everybody's at, but they're achievable contributions to make, and they will also help you if you're stuck and you're like, I don't know where to go next. They have like a whole Discord that you can chat with people in. So that was the first contribution I made. Great question. And feel free to interrupt me because I think this talk is pretty short. So I'm cool with talking in between if you guys don't mind. The next thing I want to talk about, in addition to promotions, is community support. So Community is a large part of open source. It's like the main part. And also it's part of just general life success. If you have a community behind you and people supporting you, it's just easier to succeed because you have other people who believe in you and who will help you out if you're struggling. Without community, I strongly believe you can't prosper. So the support is a two-way street, right? Like you have to give back to your community as much as they are pouring into you. So of course, as you guys probably noticed, I'm going to compare this back to Kanye and then how we can apply it to ourselves. So when I was watching the documentary, I noticed that the community support that Kanye had was from his mom and his friends in Chicago. I really think that was part of what like gave him that motivation and confidence. From people. Like he was like, okay, cool, I can keep doing this because there's people who believe in me. There was one guy who even like came down from Chicago and like literally recorded Kanye's whole life because he believes in Kanye that much that Kanye would eventually blow up. And like I think that kind of belief is important, that kind of positive reinforcement. His mom was his biggest supporter and motivator, who like when he was doubting himself, she would like lift him up and encourage him. And then in Chicago, his Chicago friends, all these other aspiring artists from Chicago moved to New York, including Kanye, and he surrounded himself by them. And they all like kind of became famous together. It's kind of cool when you're working with a group or a cohort and you're all trying to reach the same end goal. I don't know if you're like Greg, who's in 100 devs, or you're in Resilient Coders or another coding bootcamp. That's something that's helpful because you have a group of people who are aiming for the same thing. So when we're talking about our open source projects, find people who are willing to support you. Most times people are willing to support you, especially if you've shown them genuine kindness and support in the past. So there's going to be people, whether it's your mom, whether it's your friend, whether it's a cohort member, whether it's your coworker, they'd be happy to support your open source project, unless they're a hater, which I know there are some haters out there. But I know you guys can find people who will be willing to support you and help you in different ways with your projects. And here are some things that I think you can do to continue to build that community of support. Highlight people who do start contributing, establish a culture of kindness, and provide a space for open discussion. So when I talk about highlighting contributors, once you start getting a contributor, maybe it's one, maybe it's two, you can start highlighting them in your Readme. This is a project I found from, I think, Codename One, and he highlights the people who have contributed to his project. I think that shows that you value and support your contributors, and like it makes them maybe want to contribute some more, and it makes other contributors know that, you know what, this person, this maintainer values their contributors. So I do want to contribute. I do want to be part of this community because I'm going to be valued. Another thing I heard of people doing is, if you can afford it, send your contributors swag or a portion of your sponsorship money. A lot of times projects get sponsored, and a lot of times your project is really succeeding because you have one or two contributors who are just like helping to keep that project be moved forward. Sometimes you're too busy as a maintainer and those one or two contributors are really invested. So it's good to be like, hey, here's some of my sponsorship money. I do value you, because essentially they're doing free work. And in turn, they will tell other people about your project. And you won't even have to be doing all of that self-promotion anymore because somebody else will be promoting it for you. Also establishing a culture of kindness. You want to do that from the beginning with your project. And one way to start with that is publishing a code of conduct in your repository. And what a code of conduct is it basically just talks about like how you expect people to behave, how you expect people to respect each other. And you would put a couple of like consequences in there. Like, let's say people don't follow those guidelines or they are harassing somebody. Maybe the consequence is that you have a chat with them. Maybe the consequence is that you kick them out of the group. But I would also say that you as well have to adhere to those guidelines. You can't have a code of conduct for people and you're not following those same guidelines about being kind, responding to people in the comments well, responding to pull requests well, and issues and all of that. Like definitely be kind. I know that like being an open source maintainer can get overwhelming, but adhere to those guidelines so people know that you're the example. And then also, if someone in your community is not following those rules and how I talked about consequences, I wouldn't make exceptions for people. Everybody has to follow those guidelines, because you never know, one person can turn your amazingly well done environment into an environment with unkind language and harassment and toxicity. So definitely keep the guidelines across the board so people don't think, oh, this person's making exceptions for so-and-so. Also, this is a screenshot from the State of the Octoverse, which is a survey that GitHub did. But basically, they found that projects with a code of conduct have more contributors because people know this is a safe space. And I can attest to that. Whenever I'm going to contribute to a project, I always check to see if the project has a code of conduct, if it has contributing guidelines and all the other stuff, because that tells me that the project is organized and inclusive, and that's a community I want to be part of. Let me check to see if you guys have any questions. Okay, no questions. Cool. Also, in creating a safe space for discussion, you want to create a place where contributors can engage with each other and ask questions in the open. Like I mentioned earlier, Open Sauce is a project that has a Discord that if you needed help, people would be ready to answer you. Being able to discuss and talk with each other is what helps to build and create that community. One tool you can use is the discussions feature in GitHub. You can, I believe, go to your settings and turn on discussions for that repo. But as you can see in this screenshot, people are using it to ask questions. They're using it to do announcements. They're using it to just say something cool they learned, and other people go ahead and comment. And there's other options as well. If you're like, discussions is cool, but maybe I want something else, you can go ahead and leverage Discord or matrix.org or Mattermost. And I see that there's a question in the chat, so I'm just going to check. I always figured no one would read the code of conduct all the way through. Good to hear that people actually look at it. Yeah, I will be honest. There's some that I'm like, oh, okay, this is like the typical general code of conduct that I always see. So I don't read through those because I'm like, I've seen that before, but I tend to look for it and to like heavily skim and just double check that this is a place I want to be. Because in the past, one of the things that held me back from joining an open source project was like, I heard that open source was non-inclusive, and I didn't want to work in a community where people would be like roasting me or something. So I'm always like, oh, cool, they have a code of conduct, I'm safe. And then the next thing is creating good projects. So good is subjective, right? When it comes to code or art, like what do I mean by good? I don't necessarily mean like, oh, this is like amazing code or something like that. And I'll talk to you about like a few ways to indicate that your project is good. Okay, so let's talk about Kanye again, right? Normally musicians do features with, sorry, my video turned off. Yeah. Sorry, my camera overheats sometimes, but normally musicians do features with larger artists to show their audience that they're making good music, right? Like Kanye's like, dude, I made a song with Beyonce or Jay-Z or something, a musician you already trust. So like you can trust that this is a good music and people will be interested in listening to it. Because if a known artist wants to collaborate with you, then that means other people can take that artist more seriously. So how can we indicate to our target audience that our project is good? And I think we can indicate that by, like I mentioned before, it doesn't have to be like, this is amazing code or a life-changing project, but you can indicate it by making it easy to find, easy to use, and easy to contribute to. When I say easy to find, Right now, it's a little hard. I would say at least to find open source projects that you want to contribute to if you're a first time contributor. I know a lot of people struggle with that. I did myself. Like I was like, okay, people keep telling me to contribute to open source, but like, how do I exactly find them? And I think part of that is adding topics to your repository. And you can add those topics right here underneath the about section. So you can talk about like the intended purpose, subject area, affinity groups, or other important qualities. In this situation, this project's about refactoring Ruby Scientist, Ruby Gem. And what this does is when people go to github.com/topics, your project will show up there. So your project has a higher chance of showing up and has a higher chance of people finding it once you add in a couple topics. Think of them like maybe hashtags or something on Twitter. Also making it easy to use, right? You want to add in a Readme because that's the first thing people will find when they click on your repository. It provides new users and potential contributors with a first impression of your project. And your Readme guides users on how to use the project. So within the Readme, try to add a project title, a description, how to install, how to use it, a link to the Live app, and links to other important documentation, such as the code of conduct, such as the license, such as contributing guidelines, and then also, like I mentioned before, showing off some of your contributors. I think this is helpful because, like I said, as soon as you click the repo, you want to know what this project is. They're not going to just start contributing or using your project if they don't know what it is. So you want to make it easy to find that and helpful for people to just go through this without having to ask you a bunch of questions or be confused. Also, making it easy to contribute to. So I talked about the readme.md. There's also a contributing.md. Let me move this Zoom thing out the way. But the contributing.md is the guidelines for the contributor. And it basically communicates how people should contribute to your project. So in it, you might want to talk about what technologies are used. Are you using JavaScript? Are you using Ruby? Are you using React? You want to talk about how to report bugs because reporting issues and stuff like that are a part of contributing. And it's nice to have people use your project and be like, hey, you actually have a bug here. That's always helpful. You want to talk about how to propose new features. You want to talk about how to open a pull request within your project. Because a lot of times first-time contributors don't know that you have to fork a project and then clone it and all that. So you want to talk about that. You want to talk about how to open a pull request, how to claim an issue or task within your project. So how people can know like, oh, I want to do this issue. How can they say that they want to do this issue and go through with it? How to set up their environment, style guide, and code conventions. That's always an important one so people know how you prefer the pull request to look. Links to discussions forums, like I mentioned earlier, or how people can ask for help. And it's nice to have a little bit about like your project architecture so people can understand, especially if it's like complex, how so they can understand what's doing what, where's the server, where's the database, how does this work, and then any known issues that you're already aware of within your project. Another thing that is helpful to make it easy to contribute to is highlight issues that don't need as much project knowledge, right? So there's a label called Good First Issue, and that's for people who don't have legacy knowledge of your code base, but they want to go ahead and make a contribution. You can go ahead and label some of those issues as Good First Issues. So new contributors can feel comfortable. I'm saying the word contribute a lot. Feel comfortable trying to contribute to your project. So maybe it's changing the color of a button or something like that. Go ahead and label that Good First Issue because a lot of times when people are looking to contribute to a new project, they're looking for a good first issue. And then, so we talked about promoting, we talked about community support, we talked about making a good project. Let's talk about persistence. Even if no one is contributing to your project, keep it active, keep it alive. I know it may seem discouraging, but keep it up. Let's talk about Kanye again. Even when no one cared, Kanye kept making new songs. Rappers literally were like, I do not want to listen to this. Like, why is this producer showing me music after we produced a song together? He's like, oh, here's what I made. They're like, okay. But they were, some of them looked pretty polite about it, but they didn't really care too much. But he kept making new music and he kept trying to show other rappers his projects. He believed in himself. And I think it's good to continue to make, it was good that he continued to make that music, because once there was somebody that believed in him, he was able to show them all of his projects and what he's done. And it made it easier for people to eventually believe in him too, because they're like, wow, look at him, he has songs. So you want the same for you. When you want people to contribute to your project and you're promoting it, you want them to see that you have things in place, you have code in there, and you're continuing to make it better. So contribute to your own project even when no one else is. Continue to build up the project. If you're like, oh man, I've run out of product ideas, you can think of ways to set up your project so it'll make it easy to manage and scale when you get a ton of contributors. And here are some suggestions in adding scalability. You can go ahead and leverage GitHub Actions to handle like release processes, any CI/CD, and enabling users to self-assign issues. One thing that I actually think is really awesome that my manager has in his open source project is he made a GitHub action so that when people want to assign an issue to themselves, he doesn't have to go in and manually assign them. And this reduces a lot of his time, or increases a lot of the time he has. Hopefully you all know what I mean. Basically gives him his own time back because he's not doing this busy work of assigning people. They just type the word .take as a comment, and then a GitHub action assigns them and it comments, thanks for taking this on. If you have not already joined the conversation in our Discord, this removes that back and forth for him. He doesn't have to do this. So start thinking about those stuff while you have no contributors. So I'll just end most of it with this little summary here. Promote your project so other people know about it. Use Twitter, use podcasts, go into conferences, go into meetups. Whatever you can do, go ahead and promote your project. Also establishing community so that they can motivate and encourage you. And you can go ahead and feel like, you know, you're doing this for a reason, and you have other people supporting you and backing you and helping you to promote it in the end. As it grows, you want to create that safe, supportive space so that other people can see it and be like, you know what, I like what that person's doing over there. I want to be part of it. And then making your project good. Include documentation that shows your project is easy to use and easy to contribute to. And lastly, don't give up. Your project will eventually attract new contributors. I know it can be tough when you're the only one, but keep moving forward. You've seen Kanye, he moved forward and like letting people know about his projects, and he eventually became famous. Now maybe the fame got to his head, but you know. So thank you. I want to thank All Things Open for allowing me to speak, and also thanks to the audience for interacting. Let me check the chat. Hey everyone, if you have questions, thank you for this.
Can you hear me, Rizel?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. That was me that put that in the chat. Thank you so much, Rizel, for your awesome presentation. And yes, I agree that we need more contributors. Like there's some projects that are just there, you know, and then, you know, it's not out in the open, right? Thank you for all the tips that you shared. And I'm indifferent about Kanye, but I love Donda, so yeah. So do we have any question for Rizel?
Yeah, any questions, y'all? I guess there's not too much to ask, to be honest. But any comments or thoughts? Last lesson, don't let fame go to your head. Yup.
Exactly right. Thank you, Curtis. Yeah, we'll let fame go to our head.
Awesome. I feel like maybe people won't have too many questions because it was pretty much straightforward, nothing too technical.
Yeah, it was.
But Yeah. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak, y'all.